Hi, our guest today is Dr. Doug Cardell. Dr. Cardell's illustrious career includes roles as an aide to a member of Congress, a corporate CEO, an award winning educator, a consultant to the Arizona Department of Education, and a professor of mathematics. His expertise is in economics, economic policy, mathematical modeling, and system dynamics modeling, in which he holds multiple advanced degrees and certificates from the University of Arizona, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the University of Phoenix, as well as a PhD in economic policy from Liberty University. Wow. His success in the real world and as an educator make him uniquely qualified to evaluate economic systems and ideas. Doug has just this January 20th released his book titled Why Socialism Struggles. And I'm delighted to share with you that it's already a bestseller in Amazon across several categories. Congratulations, Doug.
Thank
We are excited to dive into this discussion. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, right off the bat, I'd like to jump in with a heavy question for you. We've all heard of the butterfly effect, but can you share about the butterfly effect in economics, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let me start by explaining the butterfly effect in general for your listeners that might not know all about it. It was discovered by Dr. Lorenz in, I think, 1972. He was working on weather models, and he found out that a very tiny input into his weather model could make a gigantic output. And so you've probably heard his famous quote, "Can a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil precipitate a tornado in Texas?" And yes, it can, because in chaotic systems, and weather is a chaotic system, there are lots of tipping points where just a tiny push in one direction or another can change the output dramatically. And the butterfly flapping its wings could create such a system. Chaotic systems exist when there are huge numbers of actors. In the case of weather, air molecules, water molecules, all of which interact to create weather as we know it. And each one of those molecules has some effect on all of the other molecules. Well, that's exactly what happens in economics. Except in economics, it's the people and the companies that anything that affects the economy is one of the actors that can cause something to happen. So I could make an analogous statement and say, is it possible that somebody buying a pair of shoes in Tucson could precipitate a recession in Canada? And yeah, it's possible. And so that's the way any chaotic system works. And what Lorenz was able to prove about the weather, and is equally true about economics, is that at best, you can predict the weather with any degree of accuracy about 2 weeks out. At best. Beyond 2 weeks, you're guessing. Basically, the same thing is true of the economy. We can make good, reasonable predictions a couple of weeks ahead of time. But the problem with that is it makes planning the economy impossible, because you'd have to know way further in advance than that. And one of my major research efforts was in looking at the real personal consumption expenditures as projected by the Fed, the Federal Reserve. I looked at 30 years of Federal Reserve data and looked at their predictions for the next year and looked at what actually happened. They were right 46% of the time.
Wow.
They literally could have done better flipping a coin. And again, I'm not saying that the people with the Fed are incompetent. Quite the contrary. I couldn't do any better. It's that the problem itself is impossible because it's a chaotic system. And so, and I think it might help your listeners to see it this way. How much are you, the listener, or you guys, planning to buy in the next year? What are you planning to buy? What are you planning to buy even next month? What are you planning to sell? What are your general financial plans? What are you planning to invest in? There lies the problem. If I want to predict what's going to happen next year, I have to know what everybody in the world's plans are. And how could I possibly know that? And so that's why planning an economy is impossible, which leads us to why socialism struggles. Socialism is a system that relies on the government to plan the economy. But you can't plan the economy. That's why socialism, one of the reasons why socialism has always failed. Even if you agree with a lot of their goals, it can't be done. So the goals don't matter.
Yes.
So I want to bring it down to kind of a personal level.
Sure.
I work with a lot of young adults, and they, are doing all the things they've been told to do, right? Go get an education, work hard, be responsible. And they feel like they're really struggling with meeting some of the milestones of adulthood. Housing feels out of reach. The wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. Many have student loan burden, and they have this feeling that capitalism isn't working for their generation. And I'm curious what message you would provide to them.
Well, that's a fairly complicated question, but let me see if I can break it down.
Okay.
Well, first of all, things aren't as bad as they think they are. But the problem is one of changing reality, I guess is the way I would put it. We happen to be living in a time when the world is changing faster than ever before in human history, and dramatically so. And so things have changed in ways that make it difficult to understand what's happening. Let's take housing. You mentioned that. I'm 77 years old. When I grew up a long time ago as a kid, my family of 6 lived in a house of 941 square feet. By today's standards, that would almost be a tiny home. That house had no air conditioning, no central heat. We had a radiator in every room, no dishwasher, no dryer. One of my jobs as a kid was to use the little wringer thing on the washing machine to run the clothes through that before we could hang them on the line. And that was a normal house. That was the way all the houses in my neighborhood were. It wasn't like we were in ridiculous poverty or anything. This was a normal house. Well, today the average house is about 3 times bigger. And instead of having 6 people living in it, the average is 3 people living in it. So you've already increased the square footage per person by a factor of 6. So each person now has 6 times more room than they had when I was a kid. Plus, they would have all those goodies. Central air conditioning, central heat, washer, dryer, all of the things that come with a house nowadays. And so are houses more expensive? Yes. But they're actually less expensive in square footage per person. And plus, you get all the goodies. So expectations have changed dramatically. Now, what could a young person do? A lot of places in the US, you can get land, more rural, for $10,000 an acre. You can get a manufactured home for under $100,000. So you could put a manufactured home on an acre of land which, by the way, the house I was raised in was on 1/8 of an acre. Lots today are almost always a 1/4 acre or bigger. So you could get all of that for $110,000. You'd still have all the goodies, and your house would be bigger than the house I had as a kid. So I think a lot of the problem that young people have, and I'm certainly not criticizing, I understand the pain, but is thinking that the kind of house that is now normal is the way people should start out. But that's not realistic. But there are avenues to get around it. A lot of the problem, too, is you mentioned student debt. Here in the U.S., 40 years ago, maybe a little 50, the government got a bee in its bonnet that everybody should go to college. Well, first of all, that's not even a reasonable idea. We need lots of people that don't require college educations. And a lot of them. We need plumbers, electricians, welders, all kinds of people that are hugely valuable to society, but don't need to go to college. And my plumber, at least, does really, really well. I'm guessing he's probably a millionaire. So, but when the U.S. government at least got that little bee in their bonnet, what they did was they put huge amounts of money into the education system in form of loans, grants, scholarship, all kinds of stuff that serve to separate. And this is a key thing about a lot of what I think we're going to talk about tonight. A key part of problems with government intervention, and that is anything, including the government, that separates the producer and the consumer always ends up badly. Why? Well, once the government started putting money in, students no longer comparison shopped. They would just go anywhere that they could get gigantic loans, which of course meant now they've got loans they can't pay back. But the other thing it did was it bloated the education system. So now education costs in inflation adjusted dollars 8 times what it costed 50 years ago. That's inflation adjusted. So that means that it's going to cost the average student 8 times more than it would have cost them 50 years ago. But to make matters worse, nothing has happened to benefit the students with all that money. The professors get paid a lot more. The staff gets paid a lot more. The buildings have increased ridiculously. Every student union in the U.S., I think, has a climbing wall. These are things that have nothing whatever to do with real education. And so education is a real problem, but unfortunately, the answer is for the government to get out of it. The same thing applies to healthcare. My grandfather was a physician. He actually won a lot of awards and stuff. He lived in a house. I'm taking a guess here. I've been there, but it's been a long time. I'm going to say 1,400 square feet. Had 3 bedrooms. He had a 6-year-old car when I last saw him. You would be hard pressed to find a physician that lived like that today. Why? Well, the government got involved with healthcare. So what happened? We separated the producer and the consumer. I went to my GP, my general practitioner, Tuesday. Ran some tests, things like that. I have no idea what it cost. I mean, none. It could be $100. It could be $10,000. I don't know. So how could I possibly comparison shop? I don't even know after the fact what it cost, let alone before I did it. And so that's the whole problem when the government intervenes in anything. It separates the producer and consumer, drives up costs. And so, like in the case of healthcare, physicians make a lot more. Everybody in all the other providers make a lot more. The hospitals are much bigger buildings. All the facilities are much bigger. Now, we are getting better healthcare than we did 50 years ago, but it's not because the staff, the doctors, or the hospitals themselves are better. It's because medical research. So we have a whole lot of new things that can happen that are just amazing. I mean, my wife had what's called a transarterial valve replacement. There we go. Took me a second to remember. Well, and what they do is they go in through several different veins and arteries, put cameras in your heart, run a tube up through your femoral artery, and put a cow's valve inside your heart valve, and then pull it out again. So they don't have to open your heart. I mean, this is amazing stuff. It's absolutely mind-boggling. But so yeah, we get better medical care now, but that's not as a result of better practitioners and better hospitals. It's because we got better research. So what's the answer for young people? Let's get back to the meat of things. And the first thing is a big mind shift, big. And that is the idea of working for a living is a dumb idea. And so I would not tell people just to work harder. Why? Well, you could spend all day digging holes and filling them up again. You've done a tremendous amount of work, but nobody's going to pay you to do that. Why not? You've created no value. So what we really do for a living is create value. That should be everybody's goal. As you and I talk right now, I'm guessing that the reason you're doing what you're doing is because you want to create value for your listeners. I know for sure that's why I'm here talking to you. I want to create value for your listeners. Now, why do we care about that? Boy, for a whole lot of reasons. First of all, it changes your life immediately. When I got up this morning, I wasn't going, oh, darn, I've got to go on this podcast tonight. I got to, and I'll bet you didn't do that either. I woke up excited. This is going to be great. I'm going to get to share with them ideas that I think will bring really good value to their listeners. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing that you felt the same way.
Absolutely.
And that's the first thing that happens when you make that mind shift is you get a whole lot happier because you're doing something not because somebody's forcing you to do it or because you feel like you have to do it. Now, how do you get to how does that affect financially in other ways? Well, what's likely to happen is this. Let's say you're working in a burger joint and you're flipping burgers and you don't like your job. So you're doing it, but you're not happy about it. Now, what if you make that mind shift and go, that person that just pulled up to the drive-through, they're hungry. They don't want to cook or they can't cook. And I'm going to make this burger for them and I'm going to make it the very best way I can. My goal is going to be to make this person the best burger I can possibly make. And then I'm going to serve it to them in the happiest, most joyful way I can. I want to try and make their day when I hand them this burger. Well, first of all, as we said earlier, that person is going to be happier now. It automatically brings a pride and a self-fulfillment of what you do. The other thing, though, is people are going to notice. And as his employer notices, he's probably going to move up in the organization. And he may end up like the current chairman of Costco, who started out at Costco 30 years ago as a forklift operator. So yeah, this stuff happens all the time. But in order to make it happen, we have to be thinking about creating value. Now, what advice would I give to young people today? Well, first of all, find your bliss. Find what it is that makes you really, really happy, and maybe find 5 or 10 of those things. And then find out where your talents lie. And that's another thing we're doing wrong in education. We stop failing people. I'm sorry, but failing people is a wonderful thing because it's the only way you can learn what you're good at. If I'm getting F's in math and A's in biology, that sends me a clear message that maybe I shouldn't be a mathematician and maybe I should be a biologist. And that's a really, really good thing, not a bad thing. And so as educators, we need to give people absolutely accurate information, the very best information we can give them. So now we've got a young person who has identified their bliss and they've identified their talents. Now the thing to do is look at where they cross. So what you want to do is find something you love that you're really good at, and then find a way to use that to create value for other people. It's pretty darn hard to go wrong doing that. And isn't that the world we really all want to live in? I mean, one of my dreams is to see a world where everybody is pursuing their bliss and using their talents to make the world a better place for everybody else. And wow, how cool would it be if we could actually do that? And so, yeah, that's what I would encourage young people to do. Now, as I said, we live in a time when things are changing really quickly. And that will put burdens on everybody, not just young people, but because back 50 years ago, most people had as their ideal, well, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to stay with it till I retire. That's very unlikely to happen today. So what killed the dinosaurs was the inability to adapt. And that's what is going to hurt people today. The people that will do the best will be the people who are the most nimble, the people that can rapidly change as the world changes. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just the world. And so every organism has to adapt to its environment as it changes. And the adaptable survive and the unadaptable don't. So the other thing I would tell young people is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Be aware of the fact that your career may be gone tomorrow. That's entirely possible. I don't know, maybe economists could be replaced by computers. Maybe there's somebody out there writing an economics book with AI that can do as well as I can. I don't know. But I'm very confident that I can find ways to shift as I need to. And that's what we all need to be able to do, because the world is an ever-changing place, and AI is going to be a factor, of course.
Yeah, there a couple things that you were saying there, just thinking about some of, especially the school system and how kids they're really in this kind of generalist system. And I see kids do really well in one area and just struggle and put so much energy into these areas that are just hard. They hate it. It makes them dislike school. And it's like this energy that could be shifted towards something that they really love and an area that they're actually going to flourish, versus something that as soon as they graduate, they're never going to look at that again. So I think a shift there could be really beneficial. I don't know, how that will happen, but I think the idea behind it makes a lot of sense. The other thing about that you were saying about adaptability and changing, there's something that I see in that is a really great message actually for young people, because I see so many feel like they have to know the rest of their life now and the career that they're going to choose. And if they make the wrong decision, they feel like they're in it forever. So to just come at it with that perspective of, I could choose this path now and I can adapt later, and the likelihood, that careers will change, I think is actually it takes a lot of pressure off, and I think it's a really beautiful message.
Yeah, I think it's critical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Your depth of academic knowledge is phenomenal, and it's been tempered by real life lived experience. So, what inspired you to write this book now?
Well, I was in the military, and I took an oath to defend the country from all comers, foreign and domestic. And honestly, I think socialism is the biggest threat right now to the United States and probably to Canada as well, and to the world probably. Uh, my my first concern is that people will stumble onto it accidentally. Um, I think most of the people that are advocating socialism don't even know what it is. Why don't we take a quick minute and define a few things? Socialism is a system where the government owns all property and the means of production. There are very few socialist countries in the world today. North Korea is probably the best example. Cuba may be next. Venezuela, until a few weeks ago, would have been a good bet. Uh, we'll see how that turns out. But uh, I don't think any of the people that are advocating socialism are really saying we would like to see the US or Canada more like North Korea. It's hard for me to imagine anybody that dumb. uh, I think what they're envisioning possibly is what they call democratic socialism. But first of all, that's an oxymoron. Democracy and socialism are incompatible. Because obviously, if the government owns all property and the means of production, where is the room for freedom? In other words, in North Korea, or let's take Venezuela. Actually, that's probably a better example. Chavez, Maduro's predecessor, was popularly elected. He ran on what he thought or what he called as a socialist platform. Let's help everybody. But he very quickly took over property and the means of production, particularly oil. Venezuela used to be the richest country in South America. Now it's the poorest. That's what socialism does. Because socialism requires that people do things that are anti-people. That is, you have to buy what the government tells you to buy. You have to live where the government tells you to live. And people don't like that. In communist or socialist countries, North Korea, for example, if you buy a Western CD, it's the death penalty.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so socialism puts burdens on people that make any discussion of democracy silly. What happened after Chavez uh, was elected the first time was every election after that, including Maduro's, were all fake. As a result, a third of the people of Venezuela left. Yeah, now just imagine what that means. I mean, a third of a whole country left. Something similar happened in Cuba. Florida has a whole lot of Cuban refugees because when Castro's took over, and in fact, ever since then, people have been trying to escape. North Korea is a little less escapable. It's the only way you can get out of North Korea right now is going through China, and only about 10 to 20% of the people survive it. So, and that's a really good way to look at what systems work best, is where are people going and where are they coming from? And so right now, the U.S., recent survey I saw from, I don't remember. Oh, well, said that about 1 billion people in the world would migrate to the U.S. if given the choice. Well, that would be 4 times our current population. So it would increase us from about 300 million to 1,300 million, or 1.3 billion. Well, that's clearly not going to happen. That we couldn't possibly sustain that. And where are people trying to get away from? Well, we already sort of covered that. All of the socialist countries. And so people are voting with their feet. They're saying where they want to be. Here in the U.S., you can see that U-Haul does a survey of where people are moving to and from. In droves, they are leaving what we call the blue states and moving to the red states. So California, New York, Illinois are all losing population rapidly. They're all 3 of those are scheduled to lose members of the House of Representatives because people are leaving those states. They don't like higher taxes. They don't like all the government control. They want freedom. And I think that's what we all want. And so democratic socialism, I think what people envision when they say that are what they call themselves the social democracies of Europe. And probably Canada probably is in that category. What it means is a democracy with a capitalist economy, but a larger safety net, a larger social safety net. That's not socialism. That isn't the government owning the means of production, owning the property. It's a larger safety net. Now, whether that's a good idea is a different discussion, but it's not socialism. And so, my concern is that what could happen in the U.S. or in Canada is exactly what happened in Venezuela. People could vote for what they thought socialism was, thinking it was all this nice stuff, and only finding out a few years later that what they had put in place was a dictatorship that controlled everything. And any place that socialists have been elected, one of 2 things have happened. Either that has happened, or in the next elections that were still fair, they were voted back out again. There is no ongoing socialist country that has the support of the population. None.
Thank you. I remember I asked you if you include China as a socialist country, and you said no, it's a fascist country. Can you please explain that?
You bet. Fascism is a close cousin of socialism. It's where the government doesn't own all property. It doesn't own the means of production. It controls them. And so, like in China right now, many of the businesses are privately owned. A fair amount of the property is privately owned, but the government rigidly controls everything. And so any company that is operating in China has to do what the government wants them to do. And those kind of controls put it in the same category as socialism, because now the government is calling the shots. It's saying, here's what we think ought to happen next. So we want you to do that. It has the same problem as the government directly doing it, because like we talked about earlier, it requires people to predict things that they can't predict. They have to be able to predict things so they can plan them. And so China is having some big problems. I think right now we're probably at about 50-50 before Xi is out, the premier of China. He this purged about 100 generals because I think he sees the writing on the wall and is starting to get concerned about it. And that should make us all a little bit nervous because when dictatorships go into flux is often the times when they do the worst stuff, either to their own people or to their neighbors or to the world. So as an example, it wouldn't surprise me if Xi decided this would be a good time to invade Taiwan because that might get him back in their good graces. And obviously that would probably precipitate a world war. So it would be better if that didn't happen, and hopefully it won't. I think a lot of the reason, though, why people lean towards socialism is because they don't understand capitalism. I think there are some very, very serious failures in that regard. And I have to go through a little bit of history to make this as clear as I think we need to make it. From the year 1 to the year 1500, per capita GDP, that's the best measure of how much stuff people produce, how much per person, on average, of course. So between the year 1 and the year 1500, the average person, their production didn't change. 1,500 years of exactly the same amount of production. That means there was a fixed amount of stuff in the world. There's only this much stuff. In economics, we talk about that like a pie. So you've got this pie, and it's staying the same size. If somebody wants more pie, what do they have to do? Take it from somebody else. So for 1,500, and probably before that, but for that 1,500 years that we have measures for, the rich really were the bad guys. The only way they got rich was by taking from other people. That's where the legend of Robin Hood came from. Is that, of course, people didn't like the rich because the rich got rich taking stuff from them. But then the world started to change. From 1,500 to about 1,700, per capita GDP increased 40%. What caused that? The beginnings of capitalism. Because in capitalism, what happens is this: the pie is no longer a fixed size. Capitalism grows the pie. And so everybody gets a bigger slice. And in fact, in that 200 years, between 1,500 and 1,700, everybody's slice was 40% bigger. That's a big deal. But that's nothing yet. From 1,700 on, things went crazy. Largely because of the Western Hemisphere, the US, Canada, both implementing various forms of capitalism. In the US became the first country in the world to enshrine patents in its constitution. It was the first country to create a patent office. Now, who cares? Well, if you want to have more stuff, you have to have entrepreneurs coming up with that stuff. And those entrepreneurs have to have capitalists to fund that stuff. So what does that mean? Well, if there are no patents, entrepreneurs are not going to work themselves to death trying to create something new only to have somebody else take it from them. And similarly, no capitalist is going to invest in that new venture if somebody can just take it away. So patents are a really big deal. Now, between about early 1800 and now, the effects have been stunning. The average per capita GDP now is 18 times bigger than it was in 1500. The average person in the whole world now is 18 times better off. In the US, in Canada, in Western Europe, it's 40 times better off. 40 times better off. That's hard to put your head around. Why? Because the pie keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The world economy now is huge. And so everybody's share is 40 times bigger. Now, this is where people get it mixed up. They look at the rich and they go, let's tax those rich. They're evil. They're taking money from the rest of us. That's complete nonsense. Let's look at some of the rich. Bill Gates. I'm talking to you now on a PC, on the internet. Without Bill Gates, that wouldn't have been possible. Now, before I logged on, had a little problem with Windows, but that stuff happens. I understand that. But in the bigger picture, Bill Gates has made all of our lives dramatically better. Dramatically better. I mean, look at all the things we do with computer technology that we couldn't have done without Bill Gates. Now, yeah, he got to be a billionaire doing it, but so what? Why do I care? It's a mentality that says, if somebody helps me and they do better because of it, that's a bad thing. What kind of craziness is that? I mean, if somebody helps me, why do I care if they help themselves even more? Let's look at Musk. I'm talking to you now on Starlink, thanks to Elon Musk. Again, I live in a rural area, and so pre-Starlink, the internet was really a problem. Now it's great. Thanks to Elon Musk. So I'm going to begrudge him the money he's made because he made my life better? What kind of sense does that make? Let's look at Jeff Bezos. I've actually done calculations on that. Everybody in the US and probably in Canada, in fact, probably most of the rest of the world, is $2,000 to $3,000 a year richer because of Amazon. Why? Amazon's, first of all, huge buying power means they can get stuff on their website cheaper than other places can do it. And I shop a lot. I do, when I say that, I mean comparison shop. And a large percentage of the time, Amazon has the best price. Plus, I don't have to drive to a store to get it. That saves gas, saves the environment, saves me time, saves me money. So all of these things added up save me $2,000 to $3,000 a year. So again, why would I be upset with Jeff Bezos for giving me $2,000 to $3,000 a year every year because he made money? Now, all of the 10 richest people in the world, which right now do happen to be Americans, are in exactly that same boat. They all made the world dramatically better and got rich doing it. I think that's a really good thing. I think that's a really good thing for the world. It's getting back to that thing about creating value for other people. The top 10 richest people in the world created gigantic amounts of value. So they made gigantic amounts of money. And that's precisely, though, why I suggested that young people look at creating value. I mean, that's what Bill Gates did. He was starting as, I think, a freshman in college, fascinated by programming, working his tail off to get it to happen. And wow, changed the world. And so I think that's part of the problem of people not understanding capitalism. They think that capitalists are rich, greedy people that are hurting them by making money. Now, are there evil capitalists? Of course there are. There are bad economists. There are bad poncho hosts. There are bad anything you want to pick. And that's not a failing of capitalism. That's a failing of a government. It's the government's job to provide the guardrails. I had a discussion with somebody the other day who was using as an example of how bad capitalists were slavery, and saying that it was these evil capitalists that created and caused slavery. I would suggest that isn't true. It was the government allowing it that is the problem. There will be people who will exploit any system if the government lets them. And so another person in a similar discussion sort of accused me of being rabidly capitalistic, as though we should just let capitalists do anything they wanted, and nothing could be further from the truth. We need the economy itself to be free. Capitalists should be able to do anything they want in the economy. But the government should be applying guardrails to say what are acceptable economic norms, and to say things like slavery is not a good thing. Don't do that. There are, I'm sure, hedge fund people out there that probably ought to be reined in. They're making money doing things that aren't helpful to the economy and are hurting other people. And those kinds of things shouldn't be allowed. But the problem is not a problem with capitalism. The problem is a problem with government. And so in any area of life, there will be bad people who will do bad things. That's why we have government. That's the whole idea. And government should apply those same standards to economics. If bad people are doing bad things, we should stop them. Too often, though, government does the reverse. Instead of applying guardrails, they try and tinker with the economy. Now, that's a different thing. That's not stopping capitalists from getting out of control. That's just saying the government's going to try and fix stuff. That's what caused the Great Depression. The government trying to meddle in the economy. That's what caused the housing crisis in 2008. The government meddling in the economy. And so what's critical is that we have the government staying out of the economy per se, but regulating what the economy is allowed to do. And those are two very, very different things. And so if we could get people to understand all of that and get on board with that idea, I think the whole world, again, would be a much better place. Because I think what we want is free people pursuing their bliss and their talents to create value for other people, and then getting suitably rewarded for it. Now, there is kind of a catch to that I probably should point out. I'm a musician as well as an economist, and I have lots of friends who are musicians. And some of them don't do that well financially, if that's all they do. But every one of them that I know that is in that category is happy. There's a line from that song American Pie that says, I knew if I had the chance, I could make those people dance and maybe they'd be happy for a while. That's the way a lot of my musician friends look at it. And they are perfectly happy taking less money to follow their bliss and create value for other people. And here's the catch. Value always is in the mind of the consumer. There's no other measure of value. I have another friend that has tried to make a living semi-successfully making jewelry. He complains that he works really hard to make this beautiful jewelry, but people won't buy it. And I said, well, have you done like market research to find out how people view the jewelry you're creating? He said, well, no. Why should I have to do that? This is art. I'm doing it for art's sake. And my reply, and he unfriended me on Facebook as a result, but my reply was, if you're doing it for art's sake, you're not doing it for money. So don't expect money. You're doing it literally for the sake of art. Now, a lot of people would argue that that's selling out. I'm not sure I know what that means. If you're trying to create value for people, you have to create value for people. If you're trying to create value for yourself, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can't expect people to pay you for that. And so if we look at, say, a comparison of the Beatles and the Grateful Dead, the Beatles have sold a whole lot more records than the Grateful Dead. Does that mean the Beatles are better than the Grateful Dead? I have no, that's an opinion question that nobody can answer. But they created more value in the minds of consumers than the Grateful Dead did. Now, having said that, I don't think the Grateful Dead are whining about that. I think they knew the choice they were making, and they were happy with that. They knew that they were appealing to a more niche audience than the Beatles were. And they wanted to do it that way. I mean, even the name, the Grateful Dead, sort of tells you that they're not in the same realm as a band with a catchy name like the Beatles spelled with an A. I mean, the names alone tell you that there's something different here. And the difference is one even chose their name as a way to appeal to people, and the other chose their name as a more niche idea, appealing to a smaller but different market. And so whenever we talk about value, we have to put the consumer first and foremost, and recognize that that's the only measure of value. And so as young people start looking for ways to use their talents and so on, it's critical that they look at creating value, not the way it is in their mind, but the way it is in the mind of the other people. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go for the absolute max, like the Grateful Dead. You can, instead of being the Beatles, you can go, I want to be the Grateful Dead. You can be like some of my musician friends that say, I don't care if I'm only making $40,000 a year. I'm having fun. All of those are completely legitimate. And that's what a free economy is about. You get to make the choices. And all of us are going to make different choices. And in fact, that's another important thing to understand that people don't get. We all have a little list in our head, maybe more like a web, but we can call it a list for right now. A list in our heads of what we value most, second most, third most, fourth most, fifth most. Now think about, and your listeners can do this along with us, think about 10 of your friends and family. Do you all drive the same kind of car? Do you all go to the same church?
No.
Do you all have the same kind of house?
Nope.
Do you all listen to the same music?
Nope.
No, none of those things are true. And that's for your friends. And not to pick on you guys, but if you don't think it's a problem, ask any married couple. And they will tell you very quickly that we have different lists. And in a marriage, we have to find ways to negotiate that if we want to be happy. But what that means is that in any negotiation, we're trading things that we value higher with somebody else who values something else higher. And people don't appreciate that. They look at the price, and that's wrong. Let's say the three of us go to a restaurant, and you guys really love salad, and I really love bread. So I say, why don't we trade? I'll give you my salad, and I'll take your bread. And you go, yeah, that's great. Let's do that. So we do. Now, does it matter what the menu price of the salad and the bread were? No. If salad was more expensive than bread, I didn't get cheated. I got what I wanted. And that's the important thing to understand, is that when we're trading value, that's what we're always doing in the marketplace. Everything you buy or make is an economic trade. And you're presumably trying to trade something you want and is available at less than what you have. And so, and that includes labor. So what we're trying to do is find ways to best produce our labor in a way that allows us to get the things, to trade for things that we want to get. We're trading our labor for goods. And by the way, that's another interesting thing about capitalism. If I take a little quick side trip, in 1800, um, an hour of labor got you X amount of stuff. And the cost of labor per goods was about 6-to-1 goods for labor. So goods cost a lot more than labor did. In, I think, 2014, we went over the 1-to-1 ratio. So now labor is more valuable than goods, which means that in shopping, our labor buys us a lot more stuff, 6 times more than it was in the early 1800s. And so what we're doing is we're trading our labor for stuff. And so that's part of why we want to find our bliss, our talents, and create value for others, because that's what we want to do in order to get stuff. But we want to do it in a way that best satisfies us. And that's not going to be the same way that best satisfies somebody else. And so we don't all have the same talents or abilities or wants and desires. One of the things I do in the book is I take, I think, a dozen well-known people and say, what if their roles were different? Would that work? And so would you want to see Paul McCartney in charge of D-Day? Or would you want to read a play written by Picasso?
Wow, that's a fascinating exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're all different, and that will necessarily produce unequal results. Dwight Eisenhower did not make as much money as Paul McCartney, but I'm betting he wasn't unhappy about that. We are all different, and we need to be free to pursue our own dreams and our own goals, and that's necessarily going to produce inequality, and that's not a bad thing. Now, should we all be equal in the eyes of the law? Of course. In the eyes of society, absolutely. That's a different thing. But economically, inequality is a good thing. It's a very good thing. One of the reasons it's a good thing is because when products first come to market, think about VCRs, a now antiquated technology, but when those things first came out, I think the first one I remember seeing cost $4,000. And it was big. I mean, it's kind of like a big reel-to-reel tape recorder.
I remember those things. They were status symbols at one time.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened was, though, people that had more money bought those. Now, what did that do? Well, because people were buying them, they could start making them in greater quantities, and people started researching how to make them better and cheaper. And so what happened? The price kept going down and down and down and down. I think now if you wanted to get one, you'd get one for $100, I'll bet. Because they've gotten so cheap, it's ridiculous. Now anybody can have one. And that's been true of pretty much everything. Microwaves. I can remember when those cost $3,000 or $4,000. Now you can get them for $150 or $200. A top of the line one, maybe $300 or $400. But they're not expensive at all. But that requires income inequality, because without those initial purchasers that have the money to do it, the whole cycle doesn't happen. And so you can think of it like an economic rubber band, where the people that have more money pull ahead in technology, and that stretches the rubber band. But then the rubber band starts to contract and makes it better and better for everybody else. The first computer I bought, and happily I had the money to do it, was a TRS-80. By today's standards, it was a joke. It's a paperweight. The average cell phone is literally 1,000,000 times better. And in fact, the average cell phone is 1,000,000 times better than the computers that put man on the moon. And so we talk about people having a harder time financially now, but we don't look at what they're getting out of the deal. We've got in our pocket a computer that 20 years ago would have been world class. I mean, when I was in engineering school for a while, and my cell phone is far better than what was a DEC 10 at the University of Arizona. DEC 10 computer took up 2 rooms, probably a fourth the size of a football field. Now it's in my pocket. So are people better off? Yeah. Now, on the other hand, I think another place that young people sort of get in trouble is and it isn't just young people. I'm doing that because you asked the question that way, and I probably shouldn't do it. But if people are using all this power to spend 4 hours a day scrolling on Facebook, that's probably not in their best interest. You've got this huge amount of power at your disposal, and all you're doing is to find out what one of your friends in a different city ate for lunch. I mean, we've got these gigantic tools available to us now that weren't available years ago, and a lot of the time we aren't taking advantage of that. That's another thing I would be doing if I were a young person today, is I would be becoming an expert on AI. It's a hugely powerful tool. There's going to be instances of abuse, no doubt, but I think it's really important that people learn how to use it and use it effectively. It's a great tool.
Thank you. One more question from me is, what do you see as the role of politics in economics?
Well, sort of as I alluded to with government, I think a lot of the problem is that people in politics want to promise more than it's reasonable for them to deliver. It sort of gets to that debate about how big the safety net should be. Part of the problem is that when the government gets involved in that kind of stuff, it very often goes wrong. Here in the U.S., we have a food stamp program. I think Canada has an equivalent to that. I don't know how it works, but how could that be a bad thing? Well, the first part of the problem is it brings more money into the food system. Now, we've already talked about what happens when the government injects money into something. It's inflationary. So it's going to drive up the cost of food. And it's likely to drive up the cost of food enough that it will compensate for the savings caused by the food stamp program. The other thing, though, it does is that it upsets a lot of people. That is, they see people using government money, their money, to buy candy, Coke, alcohol, things that they think that are bad for people, and so they resent having to pay for something that they believe is hurting other people. Now there are ways to fix that. I used to have a long commute when I was teaching, and so I would run into a lot of people panhandling at the side of the road, asking for money. And so what I do is I go to Costco once every couple of weeks and buy a big case of beans. And if somebody asked for something, said, I'm holding up the sign, I'm hungry, please help, I would give them a can of beans. And why would I do that? Well, because I'm happy to help somebody that needs help. That's a good thing. But I'm not going to give somebody money that I don't know where that's going to go. And in my belief, I would guess that there's probably a 50% chance it's going to go somewhere I don't want it to go. And so, what do I think about safety nets? Well, I think the first thing is it's important that a safety net doesn't become a hammock. It's not supposed to be a place where you take a nap for the next 30 years. It's supposed to be a safety net, something that catches you when you fall, but then you bounce out of it. And literally, when we use the term safety net, those were invented for high wire trapeze artists. And that's literally what they did. They caught you when you fell and you bounced back out. You didn't stay in the net for the rest of the show. You climbed back up to where you were and did it again. So, am I in favor of safety nets? If they're truly safety nets, you bet. If you want to show me a program that says, let's help people find where their talents are, find what their bliss is, and learn how to create value for other people, I'm on board. That's a great thing to do. Helping people is a good thing. But unfortunately, the current system doesn't do that, at least not here in the US, and I'm not sure about Canada, but I think it's probably about the same there. Too often, it actually imprisons people in poverty. It puts them in a place where they've got just enough to survive, not enough to get out, and no help in actually getting out. The assumption is, well, if you just let them survive a little while longer, they'll figure it out somehow by magic. It doesn't work that way. You keep giving people, keep them in poverty, and they're going to stay in poverty because they aren't going to just imagine their way out of it. It's not going to happen. And so, what we have to do is make help contingent upon doing something. And again, I'm not saying that these people are lazy. I'm saying they don't have the tools. So what we've got to do is give them the tools, not the money. I mean, maybe some money to start, but the idea should be, I don't know, some sort of a time limit that if within a couple of years they're not out, we need to fix the system. And the reality is, and here in the US, it's pretty scary. When the war on poverty started, the poverty rate was 8%. It got as low as, or as high as 12% when Bill Clinton was president. It got as low as 7.2% in Trump's first term. And now it's 8%.
Wow.
All those trillions of dollars spent, all those years, and we haven't moved the needle.
Yeah.
How are we helping people? I'm not seeing it. And so we have to revamp the way we think about all these things and actually start asking, how can we help? But how can we really help? Not just pile a bunch of money into something so we get a feel good.
Yeah.
And to get to your point, that's where politics comes in. Politicians love to promise stuff, but they're really, really short on how to deliver it. It's easy to say we're going to create a war on poverty. But what does that mean? It's a slogan. And politicians are really good at slogans. One of them these days is democratic socialism. It's a slogan, but what does it mean? Well, they don't ever answer that. They don't ever say, here are the programs I want to put in place. Here's specifically how we're going to help people. Here's how we're going to test it, which, by the way, is another thing they never do. They don't actually look and see, is this program working?
Yeah.
I'd like to see solid metrics on how food stamps are actually helping anybody. There aren't any solid metrics on it because they don't measure that. They measure how many people are on it, but that doesn't tell us how many people are helped.
Yeah.
They tell us how much food people bought with it, but that doesn't tell us how many people were helped.
Right.
And so we have to hold politicians accountable. And I mean, if I could get your listeners, our listeners, to do anything, I would say only vote for politicians who will actually show you what their plans are. And I mean concrete plans. Here's what we want to do. Here's how it will help people. And here's how we're going to measure it to see if we do help people. If we do those kinds of things, I think we can put in place safety nets that will actually work. But they're
Absolutely.
only going to work under those kinds of circumstances because, for better or worse, politicians are trying to get elected. That's their number one priority. And I should maybe mitigate. There are politicians that mean well, no doubt. But I think I may have mentioned my first job out of college actually was working for a congressman, and what I saw there was the most common expression I heard when I voiced objections to things with congressmen in general was, "But if I don't get elected, I can't do any good." So getting elected does become their top priority. Even the ones that really do want to create a lot of good. And like the guy I worked for, I think he was a good guy. He wanted to do good stuff. But they have to get elected first. And so they end up giving people a simple picture of what they can create. And we can't settle for simple answers and get the job done.
Right.
We got to hold their feet to the fire and say, that simple answer is just not good enough. We can't just create a war on poverty. We've got to have a battle plan. We've got to have an actual strategy and tactics and ways to make this stuff happen. And the answer is not just throw a bunch of money at the problem. And that's too often what government does. When they want kids to go to college, they throw money at the problem. When they want more health care, they throw money at the problem. But it doesn't get the job done. In fact, it usually makes things worse. My general practitioner doctor before the one I have now quit medicine. He said, I got into this business because I wanted to help people, and I'm sick of filling out these stupid forms for the government. He was literally spending half his time doing paperwork because the government made him do it. And he says, and they're making me deal with things that are none of my business. On one of the forms, he had to ask, do you have a gun in the house? He says, man, that has nothing to do with healthcare. My job is not to find out if people own guns. My job is to cure them and to find ways to help them. And that's sad. He was a great doctor, and he's gone now. He's out of the business.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. We're getting people that care about stuff out of it.
Yeah.
That's really, really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can see from the mental health side why we would ask about a gun in the house, but at the same time, I absolutely get that point. And yeah, there's so much red tape that you have to, it's all about checking boxes rather than really caring about the patient in front of you sometimes. Yeah, when there's too much regulation. There are a few things that I want to go back to from things that you've shared.
You bet.
So from this part on kind of social services, having that safety net, and then we also talked about AI, I'm actually curious about both of those things, because as AI really comes to the forefront and does take people's jobs, it seems like there's going to be more need for those social services, or those safety nets. So I'm really curious your thoughts on this piece.
I'd like to add to the question.
Okay.
Just to add to the question, AI, as we see it, is going to make things more accessible, is going to produce a lot of things. So doesn't that in some way push us towards socialism anyway?
Well, I don't think I don't think that's necessary. I mean, it's certainly possible it could end up doing that, but I don't think it has to do that. I AI is another industrial revolution, and there's no doubt that industrial revolutions create economic chaos, even more than the regular chaos. Um, you've probably heard the term Luddites. Uh, those are the people that in Britain, uh, led by a man named Ludd, were protesting the invention and implementation of automatic weaving machines. Or I guess they weren't automatic. You sat there with a treadle of some sort. I'm not a weaver, so, but uh, and that put a lot of weavers out of work. Um, that's always going to happen, and it's a problem. But society has always managed to deal with it. I mean, I would be willing to bet that when the wheel first became available, it probably put a lot of drag haulers out of business. It probably put a lot of um, pack animal leaders out of business. Um, it caused fundamental shifts in the economy. And so, yeah, a lot of people got put out of work, but it also created a lot of work for wheel makers and cart makers. And that's what's always happened is that the technological change forces people to change. And so that was why I mentioned earlier that people have to be adaptable. We have to face reality that we're in a very rapidly changing economy, and we don't want to commit ourselves completely to one thing unless we're prepared for the fact that there could be a shock in it. And so, yeah, AI is going to cause a similar thing, no doubt about that. And so, obviously, I mean, if I were running the government right now, what I would try and do is put into place uh, things maybe like technical colleges and community colleges, much more inexpensive ways to change what you're good at and to change to follow your bliss in a different way. Um, if that were done quickly enough and appropriately enough, we could eliminate that crash and the need for social programs. Because what we want to do is help people do what we know is going to happen, and that is there's going to be a big shift in the economy. But we have an advantage that the people at the time of the wheel didn't have. That is, we can see it coming. And so we can help prepare people ahead of time rather than waiting till it happens and then say, now, how do we bail them out? We have to be proactive, not reactive. And that's another thing that government is usually really bad at. They're really focused on how can we deal with the crisis now that it's here? And they're very unfocused on how do we keep the crisis from happening in the first place? And so, you know, we look at, well, the big storm, did it hit, well, you're on the West Coast, so, but on the East Coast of the US and Canada, I think on Canada, there was a huge, gigantic storms happening. And why do we wait for the storm? I mean, wouldn't it be cool if instead of having FEMA, here in the US, it's the Federal Emergency Management Group, if we have, how do we keep that from happening in the first place? Now, we can't prevent the storm, of course, but we could make sure that the electric lines were protected from icing. I mean, sure, it would take some investment. Like maybe we'd have to wrap a wire around the main wire that could heat it. If there, I mean, I'm just making stuff up here, but you get the idea. I mean, why can't we plan ahead for solving the problems so we don't have to react to them later? Because that's always, I mean, every time there's a hurricane, there's this big reaction. Well, gosh, maybe we could invest some money in making things more hurricane proof. Maybe we could give some people a credit for a housing credit for upgrading their house so it would withstand a hurricane better. And in the long run, that's going to be less money spent because we're not going to have these disasters then. We're going to have houses that can withstand a hurricane. But that's what government is never very good at. It's biased nature. It's reactive, not proactive. And again, that's where politics comes into it. We want to vote for people that have proactive ideas, how to solve problems before they're problems. And actually, though, that's what the free market does best. I mean, right now, there are millions of entrepreneurs out there. And what they're trying to do is figure out what the next problems are going to be and what the solution is. I mean, that's where AI came from. And that's where all the big things come from, is millions of people trying to solve problems. But we have to have a free market and an entrepreneurial capitalist society in order for that to happen, because government isn't by nature proactive. But entrepreneurs, by definition, are proactive. They're trying to solve problems before they even happen. And so what we want to find is ways to make that happen more fluidly, because in the long run, that's what's going to help everybody the most. The economy is an example of what's called spontaneous order. And that happens a lot in nature, a whole lot. And a couple of quick examples. When squirrels gather nuts, they are simply pursuing their self-interest. That's what happens with spontaneous order. Lots and lots of actors all pursuing their own self-interest. So when squirrels are out there gathering nuts, they're not going, gotta plant trees, gotta plant trees. They don't even know about trees. All they know is they're gathering food. And in the process, by spontaneous order, they're creating a better environment. Same thing with bees. Bees aren't going out there trying to pollinate flowers. They're collecting honey for food. They're pursuing their own self-interest. In your own body, the cells in your body are self-interested. There's a cell in your kidney somewhere that's just going along there being a kidney cell. It doesn't even know you exist. It doesn't care about you at all. It's just living in this environment that is your kidney and trying to do the best it can to survive, grow, and multiply. Now, that's a lot of what sometimes bothers people about capitalism, is that it requires self-interest. But self-interest is different than selfishness. Self-interest is not the same as greed. Self-interest is doing what's in your best interest ethically. It becomes greed or selfishness when you're willing to do anything to hurt somebody else to satisfy your self-interest. And so true self-interest is a good thing, just like that cell in your liver. We couldn't survive without those cells. If they didn't satisfy their self-interest, we'd all be dead. But when a cell gets greedy, that's what we call cancer. And that's when we have to do something about it. We have to engage the government, our brain, and say, we got to solve this problem. And so we have to go get treatment of some sort. And that's what government should be doing, is let self-interest, capitalists, entrepreneurs do their thing. Stay out of the way unless there's bad people doing bad stuff, and then stop them. And so, yeah, and the other thing that happens with spontaneous order is it's messy. We didn't know ahead of time when the wheel was going to be invented. We didn't know ahead of time when the steam engine was going to be invented. We didn't know ahead of time when computers were going to be invented. And we only had a slight glimmer ahead of time of when AI was going to be coming down the road. And so we always have to be looking ahead and saying, what's coming next and how can I prepare for it? And again, government's not good at that. That's the job of entrepreneurs. And given the chance, they'll do it. In the US not long ago, the government basically outlawed incandescent light bulbs because they wanted to reduce power consumption. And they mandated compact fluorescent bulbs. Everybody hated them. And they helped some, but then the entrepreneurs came up with LEDs. Way, way better. The public loved them. And so, and that's the difference. The government tries to mandate something because they come up with some solution that is of marginal utility, but LEDs are getting right now are getting better and better and better and better. And what's that doing? It's taken down power consumption in the US by 20%. That's not a little bit. That's huge. And it's getting, dramatically better. I mean, as LEDs get brighter and brighter and can do more and more, it's going to keep bringing costs down and down and down and down. And so we have to let the entrepreneurs pursue their self-interest and do what's good.
I have another couple things I wanted to share on this. So
No worries.
one, I know you mentioned earlier a lot of companies leaving, certain states to go to other states that have better, different taxes and are more business friendly. And I just recently heard this was in, I think, the UK, of one of the major corporations leaving, going to Dubai, and the amount of capital gains. Do you remember?
Yep,
That
it
was
was
lost for the country.
$3 billion
Was it that
in
much?
taxes for 1 year, which could be made by 450,000 other taxpayers.
Yeah. And so I'm curious about the kind of the trickle down impact on when, we don't have policies that support entrepreneurs. So there's that side. And then the other side, when it comes to bad actors who are becoming wealthy through extracting from others or going through loopholes, what are the regulations that need to be put in place, and how can that actually be implemented? I think those are kind of two questions I have.
Brilliant.
Well, yeah, first of all, you're exactly right. I mean, the change in the economy is huge when companies relocate. And it isn't just companies. The people themselves are also, the U-Haul survey I mentioned was also about the people, not just companies. And yeah, a good example of that happened in the 70s in the US. There was a thing called the Women's Garment Union. They had a series in New York, that was where the garment industry was centered, of very, very successful strikes. And as a result, that dramatically increased the cost of clothing. And they even had this thing, they had all these TV commercials where they would have a bunch of union members standing there singing, "Always look for the union label when you're buying your blouse, dress, or coat," and people did look at the label, but they also looked at the price tag. And what happened was the garment industry in the United States collapsed. Almost none of women's garments are made in the US anymore. So what happened? Well, they got their raise, but they got put out of a job. And so actions have consequences. And so as if the government raises costs for corporations, or if unions do it, or if anyone does it, if you raise the tax for a corporation, the corporation's got a couple of choices. They can either automate more and put people out of jobs, they can outsource, they can send it to another country, or they can raise the price to the consumer. And that's pretty much it. Because what the people who think it's the right thing or try and get to happen is to reduce profit. But that's not going to work because capitalists won't invest in something if there's no profit. And so, and by the way, profits are not exorbitant. They run about 7% on average in the U.S. You look at the S&P 500, that's about what it's going. Groceries is far less, 2 to 3% on groceries typically. So we're not talking about gigantic numbers. Although if you listen to the news, they will mislead you. Let's say last year you made a 2% profit. And this year, some corporation. Next year, they make a 4% profit. I guarantee what you'll see in the news, Corporation X profit up 100%. Now, that's true. The profits increased 100%, but their profit is still only 4%, which is well below national average. And so a lot of the things that we think we know about the economy are very, very misleading. And so part of it is as consumers and participants in the economy to do our due diligence and look and find out what's really going on and how do things really compare rather than what the media says. Because the media, I'm not going to say that they're doing it out of bias or anything else, but they're looking for a headline and they're looking for a way of presenting stuff that is engaging to readers. And unfortunately, real life is not often all that engaging to readers. My wife often asks, how come they did this in a TV show? That's really dumb that the character did that. And I said, well, because if everybody did the smart thing, it would be really, really boring. I mean, all the problems would be solved before they existed. and yeah, I mean, that's why they don't follow me around with a camera, because watching me all day, every day would probably be boring. I mean, imagine sitting here watching me write a book at my computer for 4 hours a day. And so when the media report, I mean, I've been mentioned in news media lots of times, and never once have they gotten it right. I mean, never. And sometimes glaringly wrong, because it's a hard thing to do. I mean, they're trying to make something exciting that may not be all that exciting.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. The other part of that question from before was with the bad actors, right, in the system. What about the regulations, and what does that look like implementing?
Well, that's what government should be focused on, is where are people doing things that are how are people exploiting the economy, I guess, in a way that helps them and hurts others. And by hurts, I don't mean hurts their feelings or anything like that. I mean that is actually doing them economic harm, because you're taking from somebody something that you shouldn't be taking from them. Again, it's a tough question. It gets back to the thing about politics is we have to use our, okay, in the election in New York for mayor, a quarter of the people voted. A socialist mayor was elected by an eighth of the population of New York. That's the problem. That's why we don't have better politics. That's why we don't have better guardrails in the economy. Because too many of the people don't care. I mean, it's really, really important that we do things to get people out to vote, to fire people up and say, we've got to hold politicians accountable, because we're never going to get better government if we don't enforce better government. We're never going to get better politicians if we don't get out there and vote for better politicians. And my fear is that exactly what happened in New York could happen in the US or in Canada or lots of other places in the world, where we could end up with an eighth of the people voting in a socialist government that ends up destroying the economy for everybody. But yeah, I mean, how do the guardrails look? I don't think I can make any like general rules that apply. It requires a government that looks at what's going on. I mean, in general, I could say things about, well, I mean, one area where I have written about is what I call um, it's a special tax on flippers, and I call it the flip tax. What's a flipper? A flipper is somebody who buys something not because they want it or because they're investing in it, but because they want to flip it quickly for a profit. That doesn't help the economy. And in
Like
fact, it only
homes. You mean like houses? People buy houses and then sell them at a high value.
exactly. And actually, the first time I know about was tulips in Holland in the 1400s. And what that always does to the economy is creates a boom and bust cycle. So people buy tulips, they make they flip them, make a profit. So more people buy tulips and flip them, make so more. But is the actual value of tulips increasing? No, it's still a tulip. And so what's going to ultimately happen is people are going to buy tulips, and the price is going to go up and up and up and up, and then the market's going to crash. That's exactly what happened in the housing market in 2008. It was partly the fault of government for making loans to people that were marginally qualified for those loans. It was also, and then those people were taking borrowed money, buying a house, waiting a week, and selling it because the market was going up so fast that you could buy and sell and buy and sell. Now, some people would make a few improvements, but they were making far fewer improvements than the profit they were making. So my guardrail for that is you have a tax that the sooner you make the profit, the higher the tax on that profit. So it starts out being huge. I mean, like if you make a profit a week later, you might pay like a 98% tax on that profit. But as time goes on, you get, say, 20, 30 years out, and now basically your investment is tax-free. So here in the US, for example, if you buy a house and sell it 30 years later, you're going to be taxed on the gains. Well, with my tax system, if you bought a house and sold it 30 years later, it wouldn't matter how much you sold it for, it'd be tax-free because you made that profit so far down the road. What that means is investors, people that are buying for the long term, pay far lower taxes on their profits than people that are flipping. And that really helps the economy because it encourages investing. It makes people be more and more capitalist. And so, and I'm very, very sure that the good news out of that is that probably it would almost eliminate flipping. So it really wouldn't be a tax because nobody would pay it. They would be so discouraged from doing the action that they wouldn't have to pay taxes on having done it. And so it would be a tax decrease that would really help the whole country. And yeah, there are lots of things like that I can come up with for how can we put a guardrail in place. But it requires a whole new kind of creative thinking and politicians I have sent my idea to lots of politicians, and it's either that's not going to work or no answer. So, I mean, people come up with lots of good ideas, but the politicians aren't necessarily buying that. And so the only answer is better politicians.
One big thing I really wanted to make sure we addressed is small businesses. So the impact of these really large corporations on small businesses, and especially how big corporations, their capital is a lot more mobile than a small business, a mom and pop shop. And So, where someone can easily move state to state, when that capital is mobile, what happens to the small businesses? How are they impacted, and how can they be protected?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that we have to have big corporations. And in fact, one of the reasons Marx devised socialism was because he grew up in Bavaria, I think it was, in the early 1800s, and it was all mom and pop shops. And he thought that was great. That was the idyllic world. He went to Berlin and found all these big corporations and industry and thought that was horrible. So one of the things he built into socialism was anti-growth. He wanted to devise a system that couldn't progress. And he did. That's why North Korea, people get paid $2 a day. So, and there's huge reasons for that. Mom and pop stores are not going to create cell phones or automobiles. I mean, your cell phone was designed by thousands of engineers in hundreds of countries getting raw materials from all over the world. You can't do that on a small scale. Now, on the other hand, the good news is this is the best time to be a small business. The downside is you're going to have to do it online. Now, a small business has the world as its market, not just a little small town somewhere. But you got to up your game. Now, are small town stores, brick and mortar, going to get put out of business to some extent? Yeah, the world is changing. It's an online world. And so if you're running a mom and pop store, get with the program. I mean, you got to get out there and get online. Amazon will help you. Amazon has a huge how to put your mom and pop store on Amazon training program. They will actually help. They'll even give you money in some cases to help you get started marketing online through Amazon. So there are lots and lots of avenues, but we have to be resilient. We have to be adaptive and be willing to roll with the punches and change things. But yeah, I would argue very strenuously, this is, if you've been thinking about starting a small business, this is the time to do it. I mean, the opportunities are huge. I mean, when could okay, I mentioned earlier I was a musician. There's my favorite guitar store in Tucson here, has recently, you can make an appointment and actually go into the store, but the store is basically closed. But if you do a Google search on certain kinds of guitars now, they'll be like the third or fourth one. They've moved their business online, and so they're competing with a lot of the really big online music companies. And so they're doing great. Probably far better than they were when they were just a little music store in Tucson. And so, yeah, it's a great time, but it's going to require adjustment. But that's not anything but the nature of the change in the world. I mean, the world changes.
I mean, I think I could ask you a million questions, and I also want to respect your time. So there is one thing, I wanted to ask, what's the strongest criticism of capitalism that you think is actually valid?
Well, I think it's certainly true. I mean, there are exploiters in the capitalist system, and it's true. But I would argue that the problem isn't capitalism, it's government. Capitalism itself, I'm not sure you can make it a logical criticism of it. I mean, all it is free people doing free stuff without any force, without any coercion. It's all of us trading with each other, creating value for others. And it's hard to find something that's wrong with that, except when people exploit it. But that's true in any arena. I mean, there are burglars and murderers and all kinds of people out there that are exploiting systems of all kinds. And we don't end up saying the human race is horrible because there are bad people in it. And capitalism isn't horrible because there are bad people in it. The system itself can't hurt anybody. In order to do harm, you have to have power. And capitalism has no power. It can't force you to do anything. It's all about making deals, all about negotiation. And yeah, I don't see how there can be a fair criticism of a system that just says, how can we make each other happy? I mean, that's really all it's about. But the big problem is too many people don't see it that way. Hardly anybody sees it that way. And there are people out there that are constantly maligning it and making an artificial case against it. I mean, and this isn't new. I mean, the first socialist was probably Plato. He envisioned benevolent philosopher kings running everything. So basically, a socialist dictatorship. And it didn't take his star pupil, Aristotle, to outline a very convincing proof that he was wrong on logical grounds. And Aristotle was the founder of logic, and using that logic to show that his mentor had it wrong. And for a lot of reasons. I mean, it defies human self-interest. It puts in place a system that says people have to be something other than what they are. And I remember my first exposure to that, I was probably 12. And somebody at the time, they were calling it communism, but telling me how wonderful communism was. And I said, he explained it to me. And I said, well, that won't work. He said, what do you mean? It's wonderful. I said, well, it would only work if people were saints, because you're asking people to sublimate their self-interest for the interest of the group. And what capitalism does is allows us to achieve our self-interest for the benefit of the group. And that's why it has to work and socialism can't. I mean, I was 12 and I could figure it out. And so it isn't complicated stuff. I mean, people are gonna, that's why every socialist economy has a huge black market. I mentioned earlier, if you're on the black market in North Korea, it's the death penalty. Because the people want what they want, and they're willing to risk their lives to get it. I mean, imagine you want a pair of Western jeans and you're willing to risk your life to go on the black market and get them. That's how bad people want to pursue their self-interest. And so capitalism is the system that says, let's harness all that self-interest for the good of the economy and the world and everybody else. That's what we mean by creating value for others. Going out there and pursuing your self-interest the very best way you can. Work as hard as you can to pursue your self-interest by creating value for other people. And I'm sure there are people that would argue against that if they were just complete ideologues. But it's hard for me to imagine anybody that's willing to take just a minute and think about it and say that that could be a bad thing. And by the way, I'm happy to, if you want to do more, we can schedule another one anytime you'd like.
It'd be fun. We could get some questions from our audience and just like really dive in further, because there's just I have another probably 5 or 6, but I think we can hit so many points, and there's it's
I think what you just said is a great idea. I mean, if you want to put this one up and solicit audience response, I'm happy to answer their questions too.
That would be awesome.
Let's do that.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Thank you for all the time, like the time that you've spent.
Oh, thank you. You guys are terrific. I just
really
love
phenomenal. Thank you.
We're having a great time, and I think we really have created a lot of value for your listeners.
I think so too.
Feelings mutual.
Yes.
What a fascinating conversation this has been. You've dropped so many pearls of wisdom, lots for us to process, lots to think about. I don't think we're going to sleep early tonight. We're going to be up talking about this. And for our listeners, The book by Dr. Doug Cardell is titled Why Socialism Struggles and is available on Amazon.
And lots of other places, but yeah.
And lots of other places. Strongly recommend reading it. We're going to pick up our copy immediately. And thank you. It's been fabulous.
Thank you so much. It's been fabulous for me too.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.